The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawns of Kensington Palace, but inside the grand halls, a storm was brewing that would shake the very foundations of the royal household. Prince William stood at his office window, his jaw clenched tight as he watched the media circus gathering beyond the palace gates. The photographers and reporters had been camping there for 3 days now, their cameras trained on every window, waiting for any glimpse of movement that might fuel their next headline. Kate sat in the adjacent sitting room, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her morning tea. The porcelain cup clinked against the saucer with an almost musical sound that seemed to echo in the tense silence. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with worry about the latest wave of criticism that had erupted across social media and the tabloid press. The attacks had grown more personal and vicious than ever before, targeting not just her public appearances, but questioning her very character and worthiness to be part of the royal family. The catalyst for this latest controversy had been seemingly innocent enough. Kate had made a private visit to a local children's hospital, something she had done countless times before without fanfare or publicity. But this time, a patient's parent had secretly recorded their conversation and posted it online, twisting her words and painting her as out of touch and insensitive. The video had gone viral within hours, spawning thousands of hateful comments and memes that portrayed her as everything from a social climber to an unfit mother. William turned from the window, his blue eyes flashing with an anger that those closest to him rarely saw. His usually composed demeanor was cracking under the pressure of watching his wife endure such relentless attacks. As heir to the throne, he had grown up understanding that criticism and scrutiny came with the territory, but seeing Kate subjected to such personal and often baseless attacks ignited a protective fury that surprised even him with its intensity. "They've crossed a line," he said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Kate look up from her teacup. "This isn't journalism anymore, this is character assassination." Kate tried to smile, the same gracious expression she had perfected over years of public appearances, but William could see the pain behind her eyes. She had always been the stronger one emotionally, the one who could weather any storm with dignity and grace. But even she had her breaking point, and William feared they were rapidly approaching it. "Maybe I should have handled it differently," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible. "Maybe if I had said something else or if I hadn't gone there at all." "Stop," William said firmly, crossing the room to kneel beside her chair. He took her hands in his, feeling how cold they had become. "You did nothing wrong. You were being yourself, showing compassion to sick children and their families. The fact that someone would exploit that kindness for their own gain says everything about them and nothing about you." The weight of the situation pressed down on them both. This wasn't just another tabloid scandal that would blow over in a few days. The orchestrated nature of the attacks, the way they had spread so quickly and viciously across multiple platforms, suggested something more sinister was at work. Someone with resources and influence was deliberately trying to damage Kate's reputation, and by extension, the monarchy itself. William's private secretary knocked softly on the door before entering with a stack of newspapers and a tablet displaying the latest online coverage. The headlines were even worse than they had anticipated. Words like "fake royal" and "commoner's mistake" screamed from the front pages, accompanied by unflattering photographs that had clearly been chosen to make Kate look as bad as possible. "Sir," the secretary said hesitantly, "the palace communications team is requesting an emergency meeting. They believe we need to issue a response immediately before this spirals further out of control." William stood slowly, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The traditional royal approach would be to say nothing, to let the storm pass while maintaining dignity and silence. But watching his wife suffer while they took the high road felt like cowardice. The institution he was meant to protect was failing to protect the person he loved most. "Tell them we'll meet in an hour," William said, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "And I want a full investigation into how that video was obtained and who might be behind its distribution." As the secretary left, Kate stood and moved to her husband's side. Even in her distress, she maintained the elegant bearing that had made her beloved by millions around the world. But William could see the toll this was taking on her, the way her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was looking, the forced nature of her smiles. "William, please don't do anything that might make this worse," she said softly. "I can handle this, I've handled worse." But William wasn't sure that was true anymore. The nature of media attacks had evolved in the digital age, becoming more personal and relentless than anything previous generations of royals had faced. The anonymity of social media had emboldened critics to say things they would never dare express publicly, and the speed at which false information could spread made it almost impossible to counter effectively. He thought about his mother, Diana, and how she had been hounded by the press throughout her life. The memory of her struggles and ultimately her tragic death while being pursued by photographers added another layer of urgency to his protective instincts. He would not allow history to repeat itself with Kate. The meeting with the communications team was tense and fractious. The traditional courtiers argued for the usual strategy of silence and dignity, while younger advisors pushed for a more aggressive response that would directly challenge the false narratives being spread about Kate. William listened to both sides, but his mind was already made up. "We're going to fight back," he announced, cutting through the debate. "Not with more statements that no one will read, but by showing the world who Kate really is. I want her schedule cleared for the next month, and I want us to plan a series of genuine, unscripted public engagements that will demonstrate her character and commitment." The older advisors exchanged worried glances. This was not how things were typically done. The royal family's response to criticism was usually to maintain a stiff upper lip and carry on as if nothing had happened. But William was determined to take a different approach. "Sir," one of the senior communications officers ventured carefully, "perhaps we should consider the potential risks of such a strategy. If these engagements don't go as planned, or if they're perceived as a publicity stunt." William's eyes flashed dangerously. "Are you suggesting that my wife's genuine compassion and dedication to her duties would be seen as a publicity stunt? Because if that's the level of cynicism we're dealing with, then perhaps we need to reconsider who we're taking advice from." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. It was rare for William to show such open anger toward his staff, and everyone present understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The prince, who had always been known for his measured responses and careful diplomacy, was revealing a fierce protectiveness that few had seen before. Kate, who had been quietly listening from the corner of the room, finally spoke up. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, William, but I don't want to be the cause of conflict within our own team. These people have served the family faithfully for years." Her gracious response only fueled William's anger further. Even now, while being unfairly attacked and criticized, she was thinking about others and trying to smooth over tensions. It was exactly this kind of selfless behavior that had made him fall in love with her, but it also made him even more determined to protect her from those who would take advantage of her good nature. "That's exactly the problem," William said, his voice rising slightly. "You're always putting everyone else first, even when they don't deserve it. You shouldn't have to defend your character to people who work for us, and you certainly shouldn't have to endure public attacks without any support from the institution you've dedicated your life to serving." The truth was that William had been growing increasingly frustrated with the constraints of royal protocol for months. The careful balance between public duty and private life that had once seemed manageable now felt suffocating, especially when it prevented him from defending his family effectively. He had watched Kate sacrifice her privacy, her freedom, and often her own happiness in service to the crown, and seeing her rewarded with vicious attacks felt like a betrayal of everything they were supposed to represent. As the meeting continued, plans began to take shape for a more proactive approach to countering the negative narrative surrounding Kate. But William knew that actions would speak louder than any communication strategy. The real fight would be won not in press releases or carefully staged photo opportunities, but in demonstrating through genuine engagement with the public that Kate remained the same compassionate, dedicated person she had always been. The day stretched on with meeting after meeting, each one adding more pressure to an already volatile situation. By evening, William felt as though he was carrying the weight of the entire monarchy on his shoulders. The future of the institution he was born to lead seemed to hang in the balance, and the woman he loved was paying the price for its failures. As they finally retreated to their private apartments that night, the palace around them felt more like a fortress under siege than a home. The cheerful voices of their children playing in the next room provided a brief respite from the intensity of the day. But even that simple joy was tinged with worry about how this controversy might affect their family's future. Kate sat at her dressing table, slowly removing the jewelry she had worn for what had turned out to be her only public engagement of the day. In the mirror, William could see the exhaustion in her face, the way the stress was manifesting in small lines around her eyes and the set of her shoulders. "I keep thinking about what that woman said," Kate murmured, referring to the parent who had recorded their private conversation. "Maybe she was right. Maybe I don't understand what real people go through." William moved behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders and meeting her eyes in the mirror. "That woman exploited your kindness for her 15 minutes of fame. She took a moment of genuine care and compassion and twisted it into something ugly for her own benefit. That's not a reflection on you, Kate. That's a reflection on the kind of world we're living in now." But even as he said the words, William wondered if they were enough. The attacks on Kate had revealed something deeply troubling about the relationship between the royal family and the public they served. The respect and affection that had once been almost automatic now had to be earned anew every day, and the margin for error seemed to shrink with each passing year. The sound of photographers' telephoto lenses clicking outside their windows served as a constant reminder that their every move was being watched and analyzed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for missteps, and new tests of their resolve. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of their private quarters, William made a silent promise to himself and to Kate. He would not stand by and watch the woman he loved be destroyed by the very institution they had devoted their lives to serving. If the traditional ways of doing things weren't working, then he would find new ways. If the palace bureaucracy couldn't protect his family effectively, then he would take matters into his own hands. The battle for Kate's reputation and dignity was just beginning, and William was prepared to fight it with every weapon at his disposal, even if it meant challenging centuries of royal protocol in the process. The future of the monarchy might depend on his willingness to break with tradition, but the future of his marriage and his family's happiness depended on his willingness to stand up and fight. The following morning brought no relief from the media storm that had engulfed Kensington Palace. If anything, the situation had deteriorated overnight as international outlets picked up the story and social media platforms buzzed with increasingly creative ways to mock and criticize Kate. William stood in his study, staring at his computer screen where a particularly vicious cartoon depicting Kate as a puppet being controlled by palace handlers had been shared thousands of times. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, every instinct telling him to respond, to defend his wife with the full force of his position and influence. But years of conditioning held him back. The royal family simply didn't engage in public spats or dignify their critics with responses. They absorbed the blows with grace and dignity, trusting that the public would eventually see through the noise to the truth beneath. But this morning, that approach felt like cowardice rather than nobility. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts, and Kate entered carrying a breakfast tray. Even in her distress, she had thought to bring him tea and toast, a small gesture that reminded him of all the ways she cared for others even when she was the one in need of support. Her face was pale but composed, and she had dressed carefully in one of her more conservative outfits, as if armor against the criticisms of her character. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, setting the tray down on his desk. "Maybe it would be better if I stepped back from public engagements for a while, let things cool down." William looked up sharply, seeing in her suggestion exactly what their critics wanted to achieve. "Absolutely not. That would be letting them win." "But if my presence is causing problems for the institution," Kate began, but William cut her off with a gesture that was more forceful than he intended. "The institution should be supporting you, not the other way around," he said, his voice carrying an edge of bitterness that surprised them both. "You've given everything to this role, Kate. You've changed your entire life, given up your privacy, your freedom, your career. You've been the perfect royal wife and mother, and this is how you're repaid." Kate moved to the window, looking out at the garden where their children had played just yesterday, before the world had turned upside down. The normalcy of that memory felt like something from another lifetime now. She had always known that marrying William would mean living under scrutiny, but she had never imagined it would feel this personal, this cruel. "I knew what I was signing up for," she said softly, but William could hear the doubt creeping into her voice. "Did you?" he challenged. "Did either of us really understand what it would be like? The way every gesture gets analyzed, every word gets twisted, every mistake gets until it becomes a character assassination." The truth was that their courtship and early marriage had been during a more innocent time, before social media had transformed the landscape of public opinion and given every critic a platform to spread their views instantly around the world. The rules of engagement with the public had changed fundamentally, but the palace's approach had remained stuck in the past. William's phone buzzed with another urgent message from his communications team. The situation was spiraling beyond their control, with opposition politicians now beginning to weigh in on the controversy and questioning whether Kate was suitable for her role. What had started as a personal attack was evolving into a constitutional crisis that could undermine the entire monarchy. "We need to go to Windsor," William said suddenly, the idea forming as he spoke. "Get away from London, from the press circus. I want to speak to grandmother." The Queen, despite her advanced age, remained the ultimate authority on matters affecting the royal family. Her decades of experience navigating crises and her deep understanding of the monarchy's relationship with the public made her counsel invaluable in moments like this. More importantly, she had always shown genuine affection for Kate, recognizing the younger woman's dedication to her duties and her stabilizing influence on William. The drive to Windsor Castle took them through countryside that usually brought both William and Kate peace and perspective. But today, even the rolling hills and ancient trees felt ominous, as if the very landscape was holding its breath waiting to see how this crisis would resolve. Security was than usual, with additional protection officers accompanying them due to the heightened public attention and the increasingly aggressive tone of some of the criticism being directed at Kate. As they passed through the gates of Windsor Castle, Kate felt a familiar mixture of awe and intimidation. The ancient stones seemed to carry the weight of centuries of history, of queens and kings who had faced their own crises and emerged either stronger or broken by the experience. She wondered which category she would ultimately fall into. The Queen received them in her private sitting room, a space that managed to feel both grand and intimate simultaneously. Despite the early hour, she was already dressed impeccably and clearly well-informed about the crisis that had brought them to her door. Her expression was unreadable as they settled into the elegant chairs that had hosted countless important conversations over the decades. "I've been following the situation closely," she said without preamble, her voice carrying the authority that came from over 70 years on the throne. "It's unfortunate but not unprecedented. The nature of media has changed, but the fundamental challenge remains the same." William leaned forward, his respect for his grandmother evident but his frustration equally clear. "With respect, ma'am, I don't think the traditional approach is working anymore. Kate is being subjected to personal attacks that go far beyond anything we've seen before. The speed and scale of the criticism, the way it spreads across multiple platforms simultaneously, it's designed to overwhelm any response we might make." The Queen studied her grandson carefully, recognizing in his protective anger something she had seen in her own husband when their family had faced similar challenges. The monarchy had always depended on balancing tradition with adaptation, knowing when to hold firm and when to evolve with changing times. "What do you propose?" she asked Kate directly, wanting to hear from the woman at the center of the storm. Kate hesitated, still grappling with her own uncertainty about the best path forward. "I believe in serving with dignity and grace, regardless of the criticism. But I also worry about the impact this is having on our children, on the institution, on the people we're meant to serve, if my continued presence in public is causing such division and distraction." "It's not your presence that's the problem," William interrupted, his voice rising with emotion. "It's the failure of everyone around us to protect you from these attacks. It's the way we've allowed anonymous critics and opportunistic media outlets to define the narrative about who you are and what you represent." The Queen raised a hand slightly, a gesture that immediately quieted the room. In that moment, the full weight of her authority was evident, the reminder that she was not just a grandmother offering advice, but the sovereign whose word carried the force of constitutional law. "William, your instinct to protect your wife is admirable and natural, but we must be careful not to let emotion drive us toward decisions that could have lasting consequences for the institution. The monarchy has survived countless crises precisely because it has maintained its dignity and refused to be drawn into public conflicts." But even as she spoke, the Queen could see that this situation was different from those that had come before. The personal nature of the attacks on Kate, combined with the way they had spread so quickly and viciously, suggested a level of calculated malice that went beyond ordinary media criticism. Someone was deliberately trying to damage not just Kate's reputation, but the monarchy's credibility more broadly. "However," she continued, That doesn't mean we should simply absorb these attacks without any response. Perhaps it's time to consider new approaches that honor our traditions while acknowledging the realities of the modern media landscape. Over the next 2 hours, they developed a strategy that would walk the delicate line between maintaining royal dignity and actively defending Kate's reputation. Rather than issuing statements or engaging in public debates, they would let Kate's actions speak for themselves through a series of carefully chosen engagements that would showcase her genuine character and commitment to her duties. But William wanted more than just a defensive strategy. He was tired of watching his wife suffer in silence while their critics faced no consequences for their malicious attacks. As they prepared to leave Windsor, he made a decision that would surprise everyone, including Kate. "I want to give an interview," he announced as they walked back to their car. "A proper sit-down interview where I can address these attacks directly and set the record straight about Kate's character and contributions." The suggestion sent shockwaves through the small group of advisors who had accompanied them. Royal interviews were rare and carefully controlled affairs, typically reserved for major announcements or milestone celebrations. The idea of the heir to the throne giving an interview specifically to defend his wife from criticism was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. "William, that could backfire spectacularly," one of his senior advisors warned. "If you come across as defensive or angry, it could make the situation worse. The media would focus on your emotional state rather than the substance of what you're trying to communicate." But William had reached a breaking point. Years of watching Kate sacrifice her privacy and freedom in service to the crown, only to be rewarded with vicious personal attacks, had pushed him beyond the bounds of traditional royal restraint. He was prepared to risk his own reputation and standing to defend the woman he loved. Kate, however, was horrified by the suggestion. The last thing she wanted was for William to potentially damage his own position by speaking out on her behalf. She had always believed that the best way to handle criticism was to quietly prove the critics wrong through consistent, dedicated service. "Please don't do this because of me," she pleaded as they drove back toward London. "I can handle whatever they throw at me. I don't want you to risk everything just to defend my reputation." But William had made up his mind. He had spent too many nights watching Kate lie awake worrying about public perception, too many days seeing her second-guess every word and gesture for fear of providing ammunition to her critics. The institution he was meant to inherit and protect had failed in its most basic duty to support and defend its members. "This isn't just about defending you," he said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "This is about setting a precedent for how we respond to this kind of orchestrated attack. If we let them destroy you with lies and manipulation, what message does that send? Who will they target next?" The conversation continued as they returned to Kensington Palace, where the media circus had grown even larger in their absence. Helicopters circled overhead, while photographers with telephoto lenses tried to capture any glimpse of movement behind the palace windows. The siege mentality that had gripped the household over the past few days was becoming more pronounced with each passing hour. That evening, William met with his most trusted communications advisors to begin planning the interview that would either vindicate Kate's reputation or potentially damage the monarchy's carefully maintained relationship with the media. Every word would need to be carefully considered, every potential question anticipated and prepared for. But as he sat in his study later that night, reviewing preliminary notes and potential talking points, William found his thoughts drifting to simpler times. He remembered the early days of his relationship with Kate, when they could still enjoy relatively normal experiences together. Those memories felt like glimpses of a different life now, a life where love and happiness weren't constantly overshadowed by duty and public scrutiny. Kate found him there near midnight, still working by the light of his desk lamp. She moved quietly across the room and perched on the arm of his chair, a gesture of intimacy that had become rare in recent months as the pressures of their roles had consumed more and more of their time and energy. "Are you sure about this interview?" she asked softly. "Once you say these things publicly, there's no taking them back." William looked up at his wife, seeing in her face the strain of the past few days, but also the strength that had first attracted him to her. She was thinking about protecting him even now, when she was the one under attack. That selflessness only strengthened his resolve to fight for her. "I'm sure," he said, taking her hand in his. "I won't stand by and watch them tear you down when I have the power to defend you. The monarchy is supposed to stand for something noble and decent. If we can't protect our own family, how can we expect to serve anyone else? As they finally headed to bed that night, both of them understood that they had crossed a threshold from which there would be no returning. The interview would either mark the beginning of a new, more assertive approach to defending the royal family, or it would create new problems that could haunt them for years to come. But for William, the choice was clear. He would rather risk everything than watch the woman he loved be destroyed by forces beyond her control. The battle lines were drawn, and tomorrow would bring new challenges that would test not only their marriage, but the very foundations of the institution they served. The atmosphere in Kensington Palace had grown increasingly tense as William's determination to give a public interview defending Kate became known throughout the royal household. Senior courtiers who had served the family for decades found themselves in the unprecedented position of trying to dissuade the future king from a course of action they feared could have catastrophic consequences for the monarchy. William stood in the grand drawing room, facing a gathering of his most senior advisors, communications experts, and even representatives from Palace who had arrived at dawn to discuss the developing crisis. The weight of centuries of royal protocol pressed down on the room like a physical force, but William's resolve had only hardened overnight. "Sir," began his principal private secretary, a man whose family had served the crown for 3 generations, "we must consider the precedent this would set. If members of the royal family begin giving interviews to defend themselves against every criticism, where does it end? The dignity of the institution depends on maintaining a certain distance from these kinds of public debates." William listened with barely contained impatience, his jaw tight with frustration. These were good people who had dedicated their lives to serving the monarchy, but their adherence to traditional approaches felt increasingly inadequate in the face of modern challenges. The rules they clung to had been written for a different era, when the relationship between the royal family and the public was fundamentally different. "The dignity of the institution," William repeated slowly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, "means nothing if we can't protect the people who serve it. Kate has given 12 years of her life to this role. She's raised our children in the public eye, sacrificed her privacy, her career, her freedom. And this is how she's repaid, with character assassination from anonymous cowards hiding behind social media accounts." Kate herself had remained largely silent during these discussions, sitting in an adjacent chair with her hands folded in her lap, her expression composed despite the chaos swirling around her. She understood that this was about more than just defending her reputation. It was about the kind of monarchy William would inherit and the precedents he would set for how the institution would operate in the 21st century. "Perhaps," she said quietly, causing all conversation in the room to stop, "we should consider what the Queen Mother would have done in a similar situation." It was a shrewd observation that forced everyone present to think beyond rigid protocol to the spirit of royal service. The Queen Mother had been beloved precisely because she had found ways to connect with the public while maintaining her dignity and authority. She had understood that effective royal leadership required adapting to changing circumstances while holding fast to core principles. One of the younger communications advisors, who had been hired specifically to help the royal family navigate digital age challenges, saw an opportunity to bridge the gap between traditional and modern approaches. "Sir, if you're determined to give an interview, perhaps we could structure it in a way that focuses not on responding to specific criticisms, but on highlighting the Duchess's actual work and achievements. Let her record speak for itself." But William shook his head firmly. That's exactly the kind of passive approach that's allowed this situation to spiral out of control. People are questioning Kate's character based on a selectively edited video and completely fabricated narratives. If we don't address those lies directly, they become accepted truth through repetition. The truth was that William had spent sleepless nights reading the comments and articles attacking his wife, each cruel word fueling his anger and determination. He had seen fake quotes attributed to Kate, doctored photographs designed to make her look arrogant or out of touch, and conspiracy theories about her motivations and character that bore no resemblance to the woman he knew and loved. "The problem," said one of the palace representatives, "is that once you engage with these critics directly, you legitimize their attacks. You're essentially saying that anonymous social media users and tabloid journalists have the right to demand explanations from the royal family." "They don't have that right," William replied sharply. But they've taken it anyway, and our silence has been interpreted as admission of guilt. At what point does maintaining dignity become complicity in our own destruction? The debate continued for hours, with various factions within the royal household arguing for different approaches. Some supported William's desire to fight back aggressively, while others feared that any deviation from traditional royal restraint could open floodgates they would never be able to close again. Throughout it all, Kate remained a calming presence, occasionally offering gentle observations that helped keep the discussion from devolving into outright conflict. As the morning wore on, reports filtered in from the outside world that made the urgency of the situation even more apparent. Opposition politicians had begun calling for parliamentary discussions about royal conduct, and several major charities were reportedly reconsidering their royal patronages due to the controversy surrounding Kate. What had started as a personal attack was metastasizing into a broader assault on the monarchy's credibility and effectiveness. "This is exactly what they want," William said when these developments were reported. "They're trying to isolate Kate, to make working with her seem toxic for organizations that depend on public support. If we let them succeed, we're essentially allowing anonymous critics to determine who can and cannot serve in royal roles." The strategic implications were staggering. If Kate could be effectively neutered as a working royal through orchestrated campaigns of character assassination, it would send a clear message that anyone who crossed certain powerful interests could expect similar treatment. The monarchy's independence and ability to serve the public interest would be fundamentally compromised. During a brief break in the discussions, William and Kate retreated to their private study, where they could speak freely without the pressure of advisors and protocols. The weight of the crisis had aged them both visibly in just a few days, but their bond seemed to have grown stronger under pressure. "I keep thinking about the children," Kate said, voicing the fear that had been haunting her since the attacks began. "What if this follows them for the rest of their lives? What if people always see them as the children of the Duchess who was exposed as a fraud?" William moved to her side, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that provided comfort to both of them. "That's not going to happen because you're not a fraud. You're one of the most genuine, compassionate people I've ever known, and I won't let them rewrite history to suit their agenda." "But what if the interview makes things worse? What if you say something that gets taken out of context, or if people see you as too emotional, too defensive?" These were valid concerns that had been echoing in William's own mind, but his protective instincts had overwhelmed his political caution. He had reached a point where the risk of action seemed less dangerous than the certainty of continued attacks if they maintained their passive stance. "I've been thinking about my mother," he said quietly. "About how she was treated by the press, how the palace failed to protect her, how the narrative about her was shaped by people who never really knew her. I won't let that happen to you." The comparison to Diana was both powerful and concerning. Diana's relationship with the media had been complex and ultimately destructive, but she had also used interviews and public statements to tell her own story when she felt the palace had abandoned her. The parallel was not lost on either William or Kate, and it added another layer of complexity to their decision-making. When they returned to the larger group, William announced his final decision with a firmness that brooked no further argument. "I will give the interview. We'll structure it to focus on Kate's actual work and character, but I won't shy away from addressing the false narratives that have been spread about her. The monarchy's credibility depends on our willingness to defend truth against lies." The next 24 hours became a whirlwind of preparation and negotiation. Choosing the right interviewer was crucial. They needed someone with credibility and gravitas who wouldn't sensationalize the conversation, but also wouldn't provide William with softball questions that might seem staged. After extensive discussions, they settled on a veteran broadcaster known for her fairness and thorough preparation. Kate insisted on being involved in the interview preparation, despite some advisors' suggestions that her presence might make William seem too defensive. She understood that this interview would shape not just public perception of their marriage, but the precedent for how future royal crises would be handled. If William was going to take this unprecedented step, she wanted to ensure it was done thoughtfully and strategically. The questions they anticipated ranged from specific allegations about Kate's behavior to broader questions about the monarchy's relevance and effectiveness in the modern era. William would need to defend his wife without appearing to attack the media or the public's right to hold royals accountable. It was a delicate balance that would require all of his diplomatic skills and emotional control. As they worked through potential responses and talking points, Kate found herself admiring her husband's determination even as she worried about the consequences of his decision. She had always known that William was protective of his family, but seeing him willing to risk his own reputation and standing to defend her revealed a depth of commitment that moved her profoundly. "You don't have to do this," she told him during a quiet moment between preparation sessions. "I can weather this storm. I've survived worse things than bad press coverage." But William shook his head with a conviction that had only grown stronger over the past few days. "This isn't just about you anymore, although defending you would be reason enough. This is about what kind of institution we want the monarchy to be. Do we stand by helplessly while good people get destroyed by lies and manipulation, or do we fight back when fighting back is the right thing to do?" The interview was scheduled for the following day, giving them just hours to finalize their strategy and prepare for what would either be a vindication of their approach or a disaster that could haunt them for years to come. The media reaction to the announcement had been explosive, with speculation running wild about what William might say and how his unprecedented decision to speak out might reshape the relationship between the royal family and the press. As evening fell over Kensington Palace, William and Kate stood together at their bedroom window, looking out at the gathering crowd of photographers and reporters who had been camping outside their gates for nearly a week. The circus had grown larger with each passing day, fed by the anticipation surrounding the upcoming interview and the unprecedented nature of William's decision to speak out. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Kate said softly, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you for taking a stand. Not just for me, but for the principle that truth matters more than protocol." William took her hand, feeling the weight of the moment and the magnitude of the decision they had made together. Tomorrow would bring either vindication or catastrophe, but tonight they faced the future as partners who had chosen courage over caution, love over convention. The palace around them hummed with nervous energy as staff members worked late into the night, finalizing preparations for what would be one of the most important interviews in recent royal history. Everyone understood that they were witnessing a potential turning point, not just for William and Kate personally, but for the monarchy as an institution. In a few hours, the heir to the throne would sit down with a journalist and speak more candidly about his family and his feelings than any royal had in decades. The words he chose, the emotions he displayed, and the way the public received his message would shape the future of the crown and determine whether their gamble had been worth the enormous risks they were taking. The morning of the interview dawned gray and drizzly, as if the weather itself reflected the somber mood that had settled over Kensington Palace. William had barely slept, spending most of the night rehearsing key points and trying to anticipate the difficult questions that would inevitably come. The weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him like a physical burden, but his resolve had not wavered. Kate moved quietly around their bedroom, helping him select the right tie and ensuring every detail of his appearance conveyed the proper balance of authority and approachability. She had learned over the years that in the royal world, every visual element carried meaning and would be analyzed endlessly by commentators and critics. Today, more than ever, those details mattered. "Remember what we discussed about your tone," she said gently, adjusting his collar with the practiced ease of someone who had attended thousands of public events. "Firm but not angry, protective but not defensive. The public needs to see the William they've always respected, just more passionate than usual." William nodded, though both of them knew that controlling his emotions during the interview would be his greatest challenge. The past week had pushed him beyond his usual careful restraint, and the protective fury that had been building inside him threatened to overwhelm his diplomatic training. The interviewer would undoubtedly probe that anger, looking for moments when his composure might crack and provide the kind of dramatic footage that would dominate news cycles for weeks. The production team had arrived hours earlier, transforming one of the palace's more intimate reception rooms into a television studio with lighting rigs and cameras positioned to capture every nuance of William's expressions and body language. The setting had been chosen deliberately to feel more personal and conversational than a formal interview space, but the presence of multiple cameras and recording equipment created an atmosphere of barely contained tension. As William prepared to leave their private quarters for the interview location, Kate caught his hand and squeezed it tightly. In her eyes, he could see both pride in his courage and worry about the consequences of what he was about to do. They both understood that after today, their lives and their relationship with the public would be fundamentally different. "I love you," she said simply, words that carried the weight of 12 years of partnership through triumph and crisis. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The interview space felt smaller than William had expected when he entered, and saw the cameras and crew positioned around two chairs that had been arranged to suggest intimacy while ensuring optimal lighting and camera angles. The interviewer, Sarah Mitchell, was a woman whose reputation for thorough preparation and fair, but probing questions had made her the obvious choice for this unprecedented conversation. As they went through final technical preparations and lighting adjustments, William felt the full weight of what he was attempting. No member of the royal family had ever given an interview quite like this one, speaking so directly about personal attacks and family protection. The precedent he was setting would either strengthen the monarchy's ability to defend itself or create new vulnerabilities that future royals would struggle to manage. "Your Royal Highness," Sarah began once the cameras were rolling, "thank you for agreeing to speak with us today. I understand this decision wasn't made lightly." William straightened in his chair, his media training taking over despite the unusual circumstances. "Thank you for giving us this opportunity. You're absolutely right that this was a difficult decision, but sometimes circumstances require us to step outside traditional approaches and speak more directly about issues that matter." The opening questions were relatively gentle, allowing William to establish his perspective on royal duty and public service before the conversation moved to more contentious territory. But Sarah was too experienced a journalist to let him remain comfortable for long, and soon she was probing the events that had led to this extraordinary interview. The Duchess of Cambridge has faced significant criticism recently following a private conversation that was recorded and shared publicly. Some have questioned her understanding of ordinary people's struggles. How do you respond to those concerns? This was the moment William had been preparing for, the opportunity to set the record straight about Kate's character and commitment. He leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying both conviction and carefully controlled emotion. "I find those criticisms not just unfair, but fundamentally dishonest," he said, his words measured but forceful. "They're based on a selectively edited recording that was obtained without knowledge or consent, then distributed to create maximum damage to her reputation. The woman I know, the mother of my children, the person who has dedicated her life to serving this country, bears no resemblance to the caricature that's been created by people who have never met her." Sarah pressed further, asking about specific allegations, and whether William felt the palace had been adequately prepared to handle modern media challenges. With each question, William could feel his protective anger building, but he forced himself to channel it into passionate but controlled responses that defended Kate without attacking her critics personally. "Represents everything noble about public service," he continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "She visits hospitals at 4 in the morning when children are having emergency surgeries, not because there are cameras present, but because she genuinely cares. She spends hours learning about complex issues so she can use her platform effectively. She's sacrificed every aspect of her privacy and freedom to serve the British people, and she's done it with grace and dignity that should inspire admiration, not cynical attacks." As the interview progressed, William found himself speaking more candidly about the pressures of royal life than any member of his family had in decades. He talked about the constant scrutiny, the way every gesture was analyzed and misinterpreted, and the toll that relentless criticism could take on anyone, regardless of their position or privileges. "People sometimes forget that we're human beings," he said, his composure slipping slightly to reveal genuine emotion. "Yes, we have incredible privileges and opportunities, and we're deeply grateful for them. But we also have feelings, we love our families, and we're affected when the people we care about are attacked unfairly." Sarah sensed the emotional undercurrent and pushed gently but persistently. "Some would say that accepting criticism, even unfair criticism, is part of the job. Why is this situation different?" William paused, considering his response carefully. This was dangerous territory where he could easily sound petulant or out of touch if he wasn't careful. But the question went to the heart of why he had chosen to speak out, and he knew he had to answer honestly. "There's a difference between legitimate scrutiny and coordinated character assassination," he said finally. "There's a difference between holding public figures accountable and using anonymous platforms to spread lies and hatred. When criticism becomes so personal and vicious that it's clearly designed to destroy rather than inform, that crosses a line that I won't accept. The intensity in his voice was unmistakable now, and Sarah recognized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in modern royal history. The future king was speaking with an emotional honesty that broke through decades of careful diplomatic language and revealed the passionate protectiveness that drove his decision to give this interview. "My wife has never sought personal glory or attention," William continued, his words coming faster now as his restraint continued to erode. "Every engagement she does, every speech she gives, every cause she supports is chosen because she believes she can make a positive difference in people's lives. To see that genuine commitment twisted into something ugly and self-serving is not just wrong, it's destructive to the very idea of public service." As the interview moved into its final segments, Sarah asked about the future and whether this controversy would change how the royal family operates. William's response revealed both his anger about the current situation and his determination to protect not just Kate, but future generations of royals who might face similar attacks. "We can't allow anonymous critics and malicious actors to determine who can serve the public effectively," he said with quiet intensity. "If we accept that good people can be driven from public service through coordinated campaigns of lies and character assassination, then we've fundamentally undermined the entire concept of selfless service to others." When the cameras finally stopped rolling, William felt both exhausted and strangely liberated. He had said things that no royal had ever said publicly, broken protocols that had existed for centuries, and potentially changed the relationship between the monarchy and the media forever. Whether those changes would prove beneficial or catastrophic remained to be seen. Kate was waiting for him in their private sitting room, having watched the entire interview on a monitor with a small group of senior advisors. Her face was pale but proud, and William could see that she understood the magnitude of what he had just done on her behalf. The room was silent as he entered, everyone present processing the implications of what they had witnessed. "How do you think it went?" William asked, though he already knew from their expressions that the interview had been as intense and emotionally revealing as it had felt in the moment. "You were magnificent," Kate said simply, moving to his side and taking his hand. "Honest and passionate and everything a husband should be when his wife is under attack." But even as she praised his courage, both of them knew that the real test would come in the hours and days ahead, when the public and media had time to process William's words and decide whether his unprecedented candor would help or hurt their cause. The interview would either mark a turning point in their favor or create new problems that would make their current crisis seem minor by comparison. The palace communications team was already preparing for the immediate aftermath, monitoring social media reactions and preparing response strategies for the various ways the interview might be interpreted and criticized. Within hours, every word William had spoken would be analyzed, dissected, and debated by commentators, politicians, and ordinary citizens around the world. As evening approached and the first reactions began to filter in, William and Kate retreated to their private quarters to wait and see whether his gamble had paid off. The future of their marriage, their family, and their service to the crown would be shaped by how the British people responded to seeing their future king speak with unprecedented emotion and honesty about protecting the woman he loved. The battle for Kate's reputation and the monarchy's credibility had entered a new phase, and only time would tell whether William's courage in speaking out would prove to be their salvation or their downfall. The hours immediately following William's interview felt like an eternity as the royal household waited for the public's reaction to what many were already calling the most emotionally raw royal interview in decades. The palace communications team had established a war room of sorts in one of the administrative offices, with multiple screens monitoring social media feeds, news websites, and television coverage, as the story spread across every major platform simultaneously. William found himself unable to settle into any single activity, moving restlessly between his study, where he tried unsuccessfully to focus on government papers, and the communications center, where the early reactions were being analyzed and categorized. Each new comment or headline felt like a verdict on his decision to break with centuries of royal protocol in defense of his wife. Kate had retreated to their children's playroom, finding comfort in the simple routine of helping with homework and bedtime stories, while the adult world exploded with debate about their family's future. The children, mercifully, remained largely unaware of the crisis swirling around them, though their mother's tense demeanor hadn't gone entirely unnoticed by their sharp young minds. The first major news programs to cover the interview led with dramatic headlines that made William's heart sink. Royal rage and Prince's explosive defense scrolled across television screens, accompanied by carefully selected clips that emphasized the most emotional moments of his responses. It seemed that the media's immediate instinct was to focus on the unprecedented nature of his candor rather than the substance of his defense of Kate. But as the evening progressed, a more nuanced picture began to emerge. Social media, which had been the primary vehicle for attacking Kate just days earlier, began to fill with comments from ordinary people who had been moved by William's obvious love for his wife and his passionate defense of her character. The hashtag #ProtectKate began trending worldwide as supporters shared their own positive experiences with the Duchess and criticized the cruel nature of the attacks she had endured. "The tide is turning," reported one of the senior communications advisors during a late-night briefing in William's study. The initial reaction from major news outlets was predictably sensational, but public sentiment seems to be shifting in your favor. People are responding to your sincerity and the obvious genuineness of your emotions. William felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days, but years of dealing with media cycles had taught him to be cautious about early reactions. The real test would come over the following days, as commentators had time to analyze his words more thoroughly and political opponents decided how to respond to his unprecedented public defense of Kate. Kate joined them for the late briefing, having finally settled their children for the night. Despite the strain of the past week, she maintained the composed elegance that had become her trademark, though William could see the exhaustion in her eyes. The weight of being at the center of such a massive controversy was taking its toll, regardless of the support she was receiving. "What's the reaction been from other royal households?" she asked, referring to the broader network of European monarchies who often looked to the British royals for leadership on matters of protocol and public engagement. William's decision to speak so candidly about his family would undoubtedly be studied and debated by royal advisors across the continent. "Mixed," admitted the communications advisor. "Some see it as a necessary evolution in how royals handle modern media challenges. Others worry about the precedent it sets for future crises. The general consensus seems to be that your sincerity was compelling, but the long-term implications are still unclear." As they reviewed more detailed analysis of the public reaction, certain patterns began to emerge that gave cause for cautious optimism. Younger audiences, particularly those who had grown up with social media and understood the dynamics of online harassment, were largely supportive of William's decision to fight back against what they recognized as a coordinated attack campaign. Older demographics showed more mixed reactions, with some appreciating his honesty while others worried about the dignity of the monarchy. More importantly, several prominent figures who had remained silent during Kate's ordeal began speaking out in her defense. Fellow charitable patrons shared stories of her genuine commitment and compassion, while public figures who had worked with her over the years offered testimonials about her character and dedication. The narrative that had been carefully constructed by her critics was beginning to crumble under the weight of contrary evidence from credible sources. "There's something else," said the communications advisor, pulling up a new screen of data. "Our investigation into the original video and its distribution has uncovered some interesting connections. It appears that the initial spread of the content was amplified by several accounts with questionable authenticity, suggesting a level of coordination that goes beyond organic public outrage." This revelation added a new dimension to the crisis that William had suspected, but hadn't been able to prove. If the attacks on Kate had been orchestrated by specific interests rather than arising naturally from public concern, it would vindicate his decision to fight back and potentially expose the real forces behind the controversy. "I want a full report on those findings," William said firmly. "If there's evidence that this campaign was deliberately orchestrated to damage reputation, the public deserves to know about it." The next morning brought the first comprehensive newspaper coverage of the interview, and the results were more positive than anyone at the palace had dared to hope. While some outlets criticized William's emotional approach, the majority praised his honesty, and many explicitly supported his defense of Kate. Several major newspapers ran editorials calling for more respectful coverage of the royal family, and criticizing the anonymous online harassment that had sparked the crisis. More significantly, public opinion polls conducted overnight showed a dramatic shift in favor of both William and Kate. The percentage of people who viewed Kate negatively had dropped substantially, while William's approval ratings had actually increased despite his breach of traditional royal protocol. It seemed that the public had been waiting for someone in the royal family to speak with genuine emotion and authenticity, even if it came at the cost of maintaining traditional dignity. Kate spent the morning reading through hundreds of letters and messages from supporters around the world, many sharing their own stories of facing unfair criticism or expressing admiration for her years of charitable work. The outpouring of support was overwhelming and deeply moving, reminding her why she had chosen to accept the challenges and responsibilities of royal life in the first place. "Look at this one," she said to William, handing him a letter from a young mother who had met Kate during a hospital visit years earlier. "She says that what you said in the interview perfectly captured who I really am, and that she's never forgotten how I made her feel during the worst day of her life." Letters like these validated William's decision to speak out and reminded both of them that their work had real impact on real people, regardless of what anonymous critics might say on social media. The genuine connections Kate had made over the years through her charitable work created a foundation of support that proved more powerful than any orchestrated attack campaign. As the week progressed, the immediate crisis began to subside, but the long-term implications of William's interview continued to reverberate through the royal establishment and beyond. Constitutional experts debated whether his emotional public defense of Kate represented a healthy evolution in royal communication or a dangerous departure from traditional restraint. Political commentators analyzed the interview's impact on public perceptions of the monarchy and its future viability. But for William and Kate, the most important outcome was the gradual return to something approaching normalcy in their daily lives. The photographers outside their gates began to disperse as the story lost its sense of crisis, and Kate was able to resume her public engagements without fear that every word would be twisted into new controversies. The first public appearance Kate made after the interview was at a children's hospital, the same type of engagement that had sparked the original controversy. This time, however, the coverage was overwhelmingly positive, focusing on her genuine interactions with patients and families rather than searching for signs of insensitivity or disconnection from ordinary concerns. "You can see the difference," William observed as they reviewed the newspaper coverage of Kate's hospital visit. "The narrative has completely shifted. People are looking for evidence of her compassion and authenticity rather than trying to tear her down." The investigation into the orchestrated nature of the original attack campaign eventually revealed a complex network of fake social media accounts and coordinated messaging that had been designed to amplify negative reactions to Kate's recorded conversation. While the ultimate source of the campaign remained unclear, the evidence of manipulation helped explain how relatively minor criticism had exploded into a major crisis so quickly. This revelation further vindicated William's decision to fight back publicly and established important precedents for how the royal family would handle similar challenges in the future. The palace communications team began developing new strategies for identifying and countering coordinated attack campaigns while maintaining the dignity and effectiveness of royal public service. Several months after the crisis, as William and Kate attended a state dinner where Kate was warmly received by international guests who had followed the controversy, they reflected on how the experience had changed them both personally and professionally. The ordeal had been exhausting and painful, but it had also demonstrated the strength of their partnership and their shared commitment to serving with integrity regardless of the personal cost. "Do you ever regret it?" Kate asked quietly as they walked through the palace corridors after the dinner, referring to William's decision to give the interview. "Breaking with tradition so dramatically." William considered the question seriously, thinking about all the ways their lives and their service had been affected by his unprecedented public defense of her character. "The only thing I regret," he said finally, "is that it took so long for me to find the courage to speak up. You never should have had to endure those attacks alone, and I should have been willing to break with protocol much sooner to protect you." Their experience had proven that sometimes protecting the people you love requires taking risks that feel dangerous and uncertain. William's willingness to speak with unprecedented emotion and honesty had not only defended Kate's reputation, but it also strengthened public trust in their genuineness and commitment to service. The monarchy had survived, and perhaps even been strengthened by their willingness to show real human emotion and fight for what they believed was right. As they prepared for bed that night, both William and Kate understood that they had emerged from their crisis stronger as individuals, as a couple, and as representatives of an institution that was learning to adapt to modern challenges while maintaining its core values. The battle for Kate's reputation had been won not through traditional royal restraint, but through the courage to speak truthfully about love, loyalty, and the price of public service in an increasingly hostile media environment. The future would undoubtedly bring new challenges and controversies, but they now knew they had the strength and commitment to face them together, with honesty and determination that had proven more powerful than any protocol or tradition. The palace was no longer in chaos, and the love that had sustained them through their darkest days would continue to guide them as they built a new model for royal service in the 21st century.